Good morning. I hope everything's great in your world today and that you're going to have a tremendous week. I hope that you had time to worship God with the family of God yesterday, and that this was a beginning, even then, of starting a great week in service to the Lord. I want to think with you today out of three different statements, really all that say pretty much the same thing, out of the book of Jeremiah. Jeremiah is an intriguing book, and Jeremiah himself was one of the most interesting of the prophets of God that you read about ever. And he's called the weeping prophet, but he was called by God to speak to the children of Israel, or really of Judah, that they were going in all the wrong directions. They were turning away from God, and yet those that were supposed to be the religious leaders among them were telling them everything was going to be all right. That this Babylonian empire that seemed to be planning to come against them and destroy them, that God was going to step in, it wouldn't last long, and they would be all right. And God called Jeremiah to tell them, no, it's not going to be all right. I'm going to allow the Babylonian Empire to come down, and I'm going to allow them to destroy this city, to destroy the temple, to take you into captivity, and you'll stay there for 70 years because of the sins that you've committed and because you have just absolutely refused to stand up for the things that are right and be true and holy to me. But here's the statements I want you to see. First one's in Jeremiah chapter 7 and verse number 16. And as for you, God is speaking to Jeremiah, do not pray for this people, and do not lift up a cry or prayer for them, and don't plead with me, for I'm not listening to you. Now, just interesting that he'll have a similar statement in chapter 11 and then a similar statement in chapter 14. Each time saying to Jeremiah, don't pray for them. And I find that so interesting. This time he says, I'm not going to listen to you, Jeremiah, when you pray for these people. Well, Lord, you are so moved by prayers of godly people. Why would you not want Jeremiah to pray for the people of Judah? And think about how when Abraham prayed to God on behalf of Sodom and said, if you can find 50 or 45 or 40 or 30 or 20 or 10 righteous souls there, will you spare the city? And God said, if we can find even 10 righteous people in that city, perhaps with as many as 2 million people in it, I'll spare the city for that 10. And yet there were not 10 righteous people to be found in Sodom, and God destroyed them. And so, why does God say to Jeremiah, don't? Maybe because God is so moved by prayer, that God's heart and actions are so often changed by the prayers of godly people. Think about when God looked down on the nation of Israel as they were in the wilderness, and He was leading them out of Egypt into the promised land, but they had still gone back into idolatry and made this calf and were bowing down to it and calling it God. God, in His frustration, was ready to wipe them out. He killed 3,000 of them that day because of their worship of that idol. But God was saying to Moses, I cannot just walk with you and be with you during this. I'm going to back off. And Moses pleads with God, no, if you can't go with us, then we've got nowhere to go. I can't lead the people if you're not with us. And God relents and goes and helps them and leads them into that promised land. Now, they will have to stay in the desert for 40 years because they just keep on going back into that life of sin. But here's the thing I want to remind you of. God is so touched by prayer that he would actually say to the prophet of God that he loved dearly, don't pray for them. I'm not going to listen to you. They're so carried away with sin that I'm not going to back off of what I plan to do against this nation. Listen, prayer changes even the mind and the heart of God. Pray without ceasing. Pray about all kinds of things. Instead of worrying, pray. Because prayer is powerful when it's prayed to the God of the universe, and we're living like we should in his service.